What do those Pokes have in store for 2023? Let's talk some Oklahoma State football right here at the Voice of College Football. And yeah, I guess there's going to be some Big 12 realignment talk that could sneak in here as well. We know everybody's up for that all the time. Got Cody Stovall on the line from Lockdown Oklahoma State to break down the Cowboys in the Big 12 for us. Cody, what's going on today?
Man, I'm just over here living the dream. Every day I wake up is a new day to be happy. So I'm soaking it in, brother.
Love it. Love it. So I know you're extra stoked today because the new unis came out, and you gave me the kind of the cliff notes on everything that's happened with this fan base and uni selections and how it got everybody fired up and stoked. And they actually generally, you're not going to get 100%, but pretty much agreed across the board that people are loving these new uniforms.
Yes. And, hats off to the athletic department on, listening to the fans, right? A lot of these uniform decisions are made at the top level, right? So a fan base, you don't get to see them until they roll out. And regardless of what you think, that is the uniform. It is what it is. So to hear that they listen to the feedback from Oklahoma State fans, right? Every time we do our throwback jerseys, the Barry Sanders style jerseys, they're always the most popular. So to now have those as a mainstay and multiple different color combinations is not only phenomenal, but it's an ode to the past, which is great because Oklahoma State is not viewed as a very prominent football school. And historically, we're not. But at times in history, we have been very, very good. So the fact that we're able to implement those days into today's uniforms, right? We have one that goes back to the 1945 Bob Fenimore style. The one you're looking at right there is like the 87 Thurman Thomas style. We've done an 88 Barry Sanders style, a 1997 R.W. McCorder style. It's amazing. And we've got still 120 some odd helmets that we could use. So ironically enough, being a 36-year-old man, I didn't think that I could be as excited as this about a shirt, but I am, and the fan base is extremely excited. And from what I've seen, the Big 12 fan base is actually pretty impressed with these. So we're not getting very much blowback on these whatsoever nationally, which is a good sign.
Did the athletic program just happen to get this right, or did they really listen to the fans?
Well, I think it's more of an algorithm-based thing, right? If you go back through the social media and you see all of the times that the throwback jerseys have been liked or loved or requested, or even when you do polls, there's been polls on social media. Which one of these uniforms is your favorite of all time? And it tends to always, roll back to this style. So did they listen directly? Well, maybe not, but clearly it's evidentary by what they put out that they were listening at least to some degree, because 99.9% of fans are extremely excited. And coming into this spring, there's a lot of downtrodden material when it came to Oklahoma State. And a lot of it was very, very accurate and relevant. So you haven't heard a lot of good things about Oklahoma State, especially with the fact that we didn't have a spring game. So thank you very much for this opportunity to get on here, because I do think we're going to shock the world. I know for a fact we're probably going to shock the Vegas odds, and that's good enough for me. I like money. Mike Gundy has not won.
You like money.
Mike Gundy has not won less than 7 games one time since 2005. So even when we're down, like last year was a horrendous season.
Yep.
We still won 7 games.
Sure.
So you're seeing these prognostications out there that have us at 6.5 wins.
Yep.
Sign me up, buddy. Sign me up.
All right, Cody, let's go there, because I've got so much to ask you about this program from a big scale and then all the way down into the roster. So I'm going to start here. That for me, Mike Gundy's done a tremendous job. And like you said, the football history at OK State has not been stellar. If you go down through history, there just hasn't been much there. There's been a few peaks, but until Les Miles stepped on campus and then Gundy really ramped it up, this is the golden age of Oklahoma State football in the last 12 to 15 years. No question about that. So the other place I'm going to go with that is, and this is just conjecture. This is not me knowing how hard Mike Gundy's working, what kind of resources are being put into it, anything like that. This is me seeing that there was a time there for 2 or 3 years, and it was obviously uh, most exemplified by that 2011 season, where this program was knocking on the door of the elite in college football. And of course, again, 2011 was the peak, winning the Fiesta Bowl, should have played in the BCS championship game, finished in the top 3 or 4 in the polls, whatever the number was at the end of the season. Okay. And there were a couple seasons around that season going to the Cotton Bowl, going to really good bowl games, 10-3 type seasons, where I'm looking at they're knocking on the door. They're looking to push it through and join Oklahoma in this conference. And of course, we always expect Texas to come back. Now, over the last decade, it's been a run of kind of 8-4, a lot of 8-4 type seasons. And then, of course, 2 years ago, inches away, I'm sure that broke your heart beyond anything we could ever describe, broke your heart. Coming within inches of winning the Big 12 championship, going to the playoff. But take that season away, and just for a long time, it seemed like, has Mike Gundy become the most comfortable coach in America because he coaches for a fan base and for a program that doesn't expect much. They haven't had much their entire history. He's delivered way beyond anything they've had before for an extended period of time. And 8-4 seems to be pretty comfortable in that he can do that with no problem, but they don't seem to be pushing to get anywhere past that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the show. Good job, Mark. That is the whole crux of the situation. You just summed up how it feels to be Oklahoma State, because you're 100% right. He can win a lot of games, right? He's we're the 10th winningest program in the last 10, 12 years. And we win 10 games on a fairly regular basis.
Can I cut you off right there, Cody? If you would ask most college football fans, is Oklahoma State a top 10 program? They'd absolutely say no.
Correct.
Say they're a top 25 program, not a top 10 program. 10th or 11th in wins over the last decade. So that's consistency.
Correct. And that's the thing. Gundy is usually fairly consistent, but we never get over the top. It's like we get our fingertips to the mountaintops, but we never quite creep over the ledge. That has been what it's like the entire time. Now, I do understand that Mike Gundy had a decent amount to rebuild. Yes, Les Miles kind of gave us some footing. And Gundy came in 2005, which is the last time we won less than 7 games. He booted half the roster. Like, he cleaned house. So 2005 was an exception to the rule, I guess you could say. But it is very, very frustrating to always get close, but never really get there. Because before this Big 12 format for the championship game was installed, right, it used to be North versus South, basically. And then there was a pseudo Big 12 championship game for Bedlam. Literally like 6 times in the last 16 years, we have played OU for the Big 12 title and lost. So we can get there, but we can't win it. So the question is this roster able to do so? I think so, because of primarily the schedule. Let's face it, this is the easiest schedule I have ever seen in my lifetime. And I've been going to Oklahoma State games since 1992. We got gifted the schedule that we need to take advantage of. And with some of the transfers we have coming in, I think we're going to be able to. Right, the common consensus this spring was Oklahoma State lost half of its roster, right? I'm sure you heard some of that as well. And there was some issues that needed to be fixed. Like, you can see statistically, even what happened last season is kind of an outlier to everything Mike Gundy has done leading up to this point. We did lose the locker room. It did happen. There were some promises made that ended up not coming true, which caused some of the players to be a little bit in their feelers about it, and it became slightly infectious and made the coaches' jobs hard as well, right? This year, everything feels different. The transfers that are here want to be here. The transfers that are here are all basically slotted in to get immediate playing time. Historically speaking, we get transfers that need a year or two of development still yet. That's not the case at the moment. And the simplicity of what we're doing, I think, should show itself on the field, right? We're loaded at running back. We have some quality wide receivers. Quarterback is still up in the air. But if you're averaging over 4.5 yards a carry, what you do at quarterback can you can mitigate the risk a little bit there.
Yeah, and everything that you said about the perception of this program and what's been going on during the off season, most people point to the Spencer Sanders situation and think, okay, a guy that's thrown for almost 10,000 yards and accounted for like 85 touchdowns in his career. Why is he skipping out on this program and going to a place where he's going to have to compete for the job against two other quarterbacks there at Ole Miss? Do we have a good read into what the problem was? You would think Spencer Sanders and Mike Gundy would be attached at the hip. Mike Gundy, if anything, Spencer Sanders has been a good quarterback, but a little turnover prone at times for sure, and a little erratic. And Mike Gundy has been his biggest fan from what I've seen and heard, and always stuck by him. And even through some 3-pick games in some crucial games, Mike Gundy's been right there as a Spencer Sanders guy.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, that was partially a communication, but realistically, largely on us. So before this last season, right, Spencer Sanders was considering his potential other options, and we convinced him to come back because of the offensive system and how he was going to be directly involved in some of the decision-making process when it comes to fourth quarters or play calls, right? Spencer could call off this play, call this play, so on and so forth. Well, you watch on tape, that stopped happening right around the Texas Tech game. For whatever reason, the conversations that were had preseason and what actually happened as soon as we got into really conference play were a night and day difference, right? So it caused some division. And you saw some of that with Spencer Sanders throughout the course of the season. He's been here for 5 years, and never one time ever did you see Spencer Sanders raise his voice to anybody, to yell at anybody. So when you see Spencer losing his ever-loving mind on the sidelines last season, that's a perfect indication that there's something deeper here than it's not just on Spencer. It's not just on Casey Dunn. Right? There's a middle ground here that a lot of people didn't exactly take into consideration. So with that being said, I know for 100% certainty there are a few players that wanted to come back. They just wanted some assurances that this next year will be better because of X, Y, and Z. And when that didn't happen, some of them, they chose to look around. And not last year, the previous season, we allowed players that were transferring to still play in the bowl game. Well, we didn't do that this year. So I guess there was, some miscommunication. So Spencer tested the waters, thought he had something worked out with a couple places, maybe Auburn. And it didn't quite work out. And then he came back and Gundy said, no, you can't come back. And that's what it is. That's it. That's precisely 100% what happened. So in my opinion, we screwed Spencer Sanders. We wasted Spencer Sanders. And now we get to go watch what Spencer Sanders can do in a traditional high-flying offense that he was designed to do. I have nothing but love for Spencer, right? Because I know that he didn't leave because he absolutely wanted to. He left because of the situation surrounding it.
Alan Bowman comes back to the Big 12, where he was at Texas Tech. He was a starter for about a season and a half, threw about 33 touchdowns off the top of my head. Remember that number from talking a lot of Alan Bowman when he transferred to Michigan. And I thought he might be a viable backup there, and he kind of got lost. Then he comes back to Oklahoma State. So is he the starter, or is there a big quarterback battle going on right now?
It's very much still a battle going on. Alan Bowman is a lot like Spencer Sanders, not athletically, obviously. He's not going to do that stuff, but from a management situation. So there's times that, throwing the nets and stuff, the dude goes like 45 for 47. It's a thing of beauty. Looks like Drew Brees. And then we go live and it gets crazy and he throws back-to-back picks. It's the same thing we've seen out of Spencer Sanders. And if we're going with the simplicity approach offensively, and now we go back to having a traditional fullback, back to having a traditional tight end, we're going to want to run the ball. And we run the ball successfully, you need your quarterback to manage the game. I know that the game manager acronym is used very often, and it's typically misused. But I don't think that's the case this time. We need a Trent Dilfer type. We don't necessarily need a Tom Brady type. And that's why there's still a competition. Garrett Rangel is even. He's steady Eddie. Doesn't throw a lot of picks. He's not going to drop a lot of NFL dimes, but he's going to lead you down the field, and you feel pretty safe about it. Alan Bowman gives you the big-time explosive ability, but he also gives you the Spencer Sanders, why are you throwing 4 picks ability too.
I want to address one comment. So Jason Sherman, appreciate you being here, man. Don't know that you're probably following Cody over here, so probably don't lock in on what we do here on a regular basis. So we appreciate you being here. So Jason took some exception to my take about Mike Gundy being 8-4 for a decade. Okay, I was making a general statement. I wasn't outlining every specific record. So then when I pointed that out, he told me that was a terrible take. Okay.
Well, by laws of averages, I think you're probably spot on.
I think I'm dead on. Yeah. I'm looking at Mike Gundy's record since, and I was pointing out since 2011, 8-5, 10-3, 7-6, 10-3, 10-3, 10-3, 7-6, 8-5, 8-3, 12-2, 7-6. You average all those out, and if you want to make that into one regular season record, that's 8-4. The percentages are almost dead on. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you might be 8.5, 3.5 if we're
exactly. Exactly. All right. So when you look at the rest of this roster, how good do you feel about it compared to what you're used to having? More question marks than usual because of all the turnover? You excited about what's there, and where are the big trouble spots going into
Well, I'm very
August?
glad you asked that question, because this is going to give an opportunity to dispel a bunch of myths, right? About the Oklahoma State is going to be terrible because they lost half their team. That is the most misguided thing I've heard all offseason. We lost Spencer Sanders. Yes, that will hurt. We lost Mason Cobb. Yes, that will absolutely hurt. We lost Trace Ford. That should hurt to some degree. We lost Jabbar Muhammad. Other than that, everybody else that left was a backup, or they're going to the NFL draft. So I personally am not all that concerned. The transfers that we got in seem to be filling those voids very well. And let's face it, we've changed things so much, offensively and defensively, that you're going to see a new Oklahoma State regardless of what the roster looks like. And this new Brian Nardo defense, it allows everybody to fly around. Again, simplicity. This season is all based off of the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. That is what we're doing defensively as well. And we've got some dudes. So safety was a position we were loaded at last year. Linebacker, okay, not so much. I got that. But we brought in Justin Wright from Tulsa, who had over 120 tackles. And I don't care where you play, it's hard to get 120 tackles on space, dead air in practice. So that should translate. He's done that twice. He did that twice at Tulsa, had over 100 tackles. Well, he brought in his buddy, Anthony Goodlow, who's rated as a 4-star transfer, who should be able to slide in immediately and take the Trace Ford role. But Trace Ford, even last year, was a rotational piece with Colin Oliver. Well, now we have Colin Oliver playing that Von Miller hybrid style of linebacker that will go stand up defensive end occasionally, right? And he'll still drop back into coverage. And we've got Kendall Daniels, who was the top player in Oklahoma, transferred from Texas A&M. Lyric Rawls, Trey Rucker is making a big name for himself. Cameron Epps has been amazing. Cornerback, we're good, but that may be the position we don't have a lot of depth. But we brought in Ladarius Webb Jr., and his dad won a Super Bowl and played 9 years with the Ravens. So we know athletically he's ready. Matter of fact, he was so ready, we brought him in as a cornerback, and instantaneously we knew that he was out of position. He hits too hard. He plays too fast. So we moved him to safety. So we're going to have a lot of safeties on the field that have the ability to blitz, and they'll be able to stay in the box as well. So the positions that I think we're strongest at are definitely safety and running back, without question. Our O-line finally goes 3 deep. We haven't gone 3 deep on our offensive line in 5-6 years. And I may be being generous there. Everyone wants to talk about the guy that just transferred to BYU, Caleb Etienne, but he was the second worst graded offensive line on the team last year. We had to shed 65 pounds off the young man to be able to get him on the field, and he lost his spot. Like, that's just, it is what it is. He came into the spring, no question, the right tackle. Throughout the spring, he lost his spot, and he was told come fall he was going to have to split reps, and he didn't think he needed to do that, so he left. again, I think that's an indication on the depth that we have, as opposed to this mass exodus that you kind of hear about sometimes.
And that over under win total that you cited at the top of the show, 6.5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's not very many, and this is why I'm excited about it selfishly. I can't remember the last time we were projected to finish 11th place in the conference. I mean, honest, you know what I mean? So this might be the best gift Oklahoma State fans ever get from Vegas insiders, because Gundy typically does decent against the spread. He does very, very good against the spread in bowl games. And now he has the opportunity here. And without, okay, if we just even pretended that we did lose half the roster, and if we just pretended that the transfers we brought in are not good enough to be on the same level, this schedule, oh, thank you, sir. This schedule should have us winning 7 games with Gunnar Gundy running backwards, playing right-handed.
Yeah, so Arizona State went 3-9 last year. They've got a new head coach. He may turn out to be a good one in Kenny Dillingham, but it's still a first-year situation there with either, hey, if they go with Jaden Rashada, the true freshman, or they brought in, man,
Alabama
I'm blanking.
transfer?
I'm sorry, what?
The Alabama transfer?
Yeah, Paul Tyson. I thought they had somebody else that they brought in as well. I'll give that a look. Trenton Bourget was their starting quarterback last year, and I just talked to Michelle Gardner, Arizona Republic. She actually expects him to keep the job. So anyway, they've got a quarterback battle to figure out, and but they're not a very good football team that needs restocking. I would expect them to win more than 3 games this year, but this not to be one of them in terms of the Oklahoma State game, although it's in the desert. South Alabama is a pretty good G5 team. And
Yes, they are.
There was a close one. What was that? 2-3 years ago against Western Michigan. I get those Michigan schools confused. Central Michigan.
Yeah.
That was a tight one. A few. Well, there was one where the final score was a bit misleading. They scored a bunch of points at the end. It was like 58-45 or 44.
Yeah, that was last year.
Okay, that was last year, but it was like 51-15 or something at one point in that game. So that was misleading.
It got a little wild, yes.
There was another one that was a close one.
Boise?
Yeah, well, there was the 2 Boise games, yeah. But getting in back to 2023, yeah. So in terms of the newbies to the conference, who did you guys draw here?
We're the only school that got all 4 of them.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, this conference is so difficult to predict that I have to group these games together more so than just say, are they going to beat Kansas State? Are they going to beat Kansas? Are they going to beat Cincinnati? You know, I almost have to group them together but who do you miss? That's the big question.
We missed Texas and Texas Tech.
Well, that's not a bad draw right there.
And you know what, man? I like to throw shade at every chance that I can with Texas, right? Because we've been beating them down for the better part of a decade.
Even when you're down by 2 scores in the 4th quarter.
Yeah, it's so I like to joke like it's almost a guaranteed win on our schedule. So we love playing Texas.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, I think this is probably the best chance they have at getting back to Arlington in the last decade.
Oh, I do too. I think on paper, but this is
Texas is always a paper.
Who has not said this in the last decade? But I do think that this is the first time, though, I think that they're clearly the best team.
I wouldn't say clearly. Kansas State brought back a decent amount and had a very good transfer class. I think TCU might take a little bit of a step back, right? Might have a little bit of a hangover. Cincinnati, I don't think their depth is going to be where it needs to be for a couple of seasons. UCF at UCF in the bounce house, that's going to be kind of fun, a little bit scary. Going to Houston, I'll be at the Houston game for sure. It's going to be fun. But again, I think the depth is where you should see the benefits show out in the 4th quarter. BYU to close the year in Boone Pickens, that is awesome. Even though Provo is like my #1 destination spot, so I'll be able to go to Provo next year. But yeah, our schedule is insanely favorable.
Folks, we got a good show going here with Cody Stovall. You can join him on Oklahoma State in terms of Locked On Oklahoma State. What's the best way to find everything that you've got going on?
You can find me on Twitter at Aldeo State, and then I have a daily show, Locked On Oklahoma State. That's pretty much it. And then I also I do travel the country on behalf of Epic Sports Flex Zone 1-on-1. We try to do some of this 7-on-7 stuff with a completely different slant, because the 7-on-7 scene, it's gotten a little loosey-goosey. It used to be about development, right? Truly developing the players individually. And then it's kind of turned into this glorified, showmanship contest. So, we like to focus one-on-one. We do a lot of one-on-one drills. We go to multiple states. So that's kind of what I'm jumping into at the very moment. So make sure you reach out to me on Twitter. You can reach out to me on the show on YouTube as well. We're available on every single podcasting platform. And if you've got kids in multiple states, quarterback, running back, linebacker, defensive line, and you want to get some individual one-on-one drills, I also I'll do pieces where I write about each individual athlete, each individual 7-on-7 team. And it's a lot of fun, man. I get to dive into film on a daily basis, and I never get burnt out.
Cody, appreciate you being here. It seems like every time I run into a Big 12 guy, he's from Oklahoma and Texas, and so they don't even count at this point. So
Facts.
in terms of what's going on with this conference, and I think this is a whole lot of fun, and I may have alluded to this the other night when we had you on talking about possible realignment scenarios, but I look at this conference, and unfortunately, we've gotten to a place in college football where everybody's concerned about the playoff, and that's it. And I'm not like that. I love, give me Kansas State, Texas Tech, give me Oklahoma State, Kansas at their D center like they were last year, or Iowa State. I love those games, even if they're sitting there at 5-3 versus 4-4. It's good football. It's fun. It's competitive. And this going forward, I don't think I'm kidding anyone, and I don't think anybody's going to scoff at this statement that this is going to be the most competitive conference in college football going forward, unless things drastically change.
100%. And it's not even that close. Like, I know sometimes it can be misconstrued as like throwing shade, but I think it's just calling a spade a spade. When you look at the Big Ten is Ohio State, Michigan. When you look at the SEC is what? Bama, Georgia, LSU. And I know the SEC is a little bit of a different animal, but I guess by and large what I'm saying is the bottom half of every other league would get destroyed by the Big 12 teams in the bottom half. So if you put our bottom half against every other conference's bottom half, it's not even a competition. Now, the problem is the top half. We don't necessarily have the top half guys. And with OU and Texas leaving, the aesthetics of the conference when it comes to the blue blood, obviously we lose that as well. So I think that you're not only dead on, but I think the parity in the Big 12 is going to put whatever teams we get into the playoff more prepared than most.
Well, I will say this.
We know Michigan ain't ready.
What's that about Michigan?
We know Michigan ain't ready for the Big 12.
Apparently not. They can't get their quarterback not to throw pick sixes. So that's a problem. But see, for me, I don't think you're going to agree with this point, but if you just look at results and you don't care about trying to evaluate talent, look at recruiting rankings, look at NFL draft selections, just what is going on the field. The SEC was again the best last year. And I tell people this almost every day. They get upset about the SEC. And I say, I am the person that would be most benefited by having an argument about the best conference. I wish we could have an argument about the best conference. I would love that, but we can't have that argument because it's not an argument.
Correct.
It's not close. Now,
Bama
is it
and Georgia? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is it to the extent or to the extreme that a lot of SEC fans believe the gap is? No. But I don't think it's debatable in any way. It's not debatable, just the results on the field. Even if you take away the recruiting, take away the NFL draft selections, and just focus on results on the field, the SEC plays better against the other conferences and does every year, both in the regular season and in postseason play. When you put it all together, sure, they trip up in the bowl schedule just like everybody else a few times, and then people are ready to jump when the SEC's lost 2 consecutive bowl games.
Yeah.
But when you put it all together, now the issue is with the rest of it. So if you take the NFL, if you take the recruiting, if you take the eyeballs on TV sets and all that, and the money and everything, obviously almost everybody's going to say the Big Ten is the second best conference, me included. But if you just look at the results and the results from last season, you can't say that. You can't say that the Big Ten is definitely the second best. It's like a muddied, just the only thing I can say is that the ACC was the worst conference last year. Did not play well against the other conferences, got obliterated like they typically do and have for about the last 5 years. Well, the Pac-12 has been awful, but they had a bit of a resurgence. Pac-12 people overplay that, but a bit of a resurgence and played well and showed up against decent competition outside the conference. But for me, Cody, before I let you cut loose on this one, it's the SEC's number 1, the Big Ten's number 2, the Big 12's number 3, the Pac-12's 4, and the ACC's 5 until I see different. That's my evaluation from last season. But I will say, based on just the results on the field, I can't say that the Big Ten was definitely the second best by any stretch.
Well, and even some of the TV numbers indicate that as well, right? We talk about TV revenue, eyeballs, and all that stuff being relevant in this realignment conversation. And there were several times where the Big 12 outperformed some of the bigger games in the Big 10. I mean, heck, you want to talk about KU? KU had ESPN, right, when they were both undefeated playing Duke. That was the most watched game day pre-November in the last 16 years.
You're talking about game day. You're not talking about an actual game, Cody.
Yeah, I'm saying TV, eyeballs, people viewing stuff. Like you would think that the Big Ten would just absolutely demolish the Big 12 in the amount of viewers per game. But other than your big ticket games, there were several times that even Oklahoma State surpassed some of the Big Ten teams in viewership for each individual week. That happened several times.
I don't think we want to pull up the TV ratings, do we?
I mean, it could help. I mean, obviously, there's a
we'll
difference,
go there,
but the gap it's definitely showing the differentiation between the conferences, and I think you're 100% spot on there with your analysis. Let's face it, Georgia and Alabama could play in the NFL. Would they win? Probably not, but they could somewhat compete with the bodies that they have. So yeah, there is no question. The SEC is what it is. And you also got to give kudos to the SEC for marketing, right? The SEC developed themselves as the top brand before they were even really the top brand. Back in 1984, the SEC was the very first school to break off from doing their own individual TV negotiations. Before then, the FCA did all of it. So the SEC has always been at the forefront of college football, and you always got to give them props for that.
All right, Cody, you ready for this?
Yes,
because
sir.
The Big Ten's going to show up on this. I did a series on this. I went through
got you.
all this. So what we got here in week 0, week 1, and I should probably grab my glasses so I can see what's going on here. But okay, Notre Dame, Ohio State, they're playing in prime time. It by far crushes everything by over 3 million views.
Yeah.
I think the thing that needs to be considered here, Florida State, LSU, that was played on a Sunday night by itself. So everybody watching college football is watching that game.
Roger.
So Ohio State, Notre Dame had a disadvantage in that they're competing against 7, 8 other games on at the same time and still pulled in those kind of numbers.
Tracking.
And the same thing, Clemson, Georgia Tech. That looks like a really good number. Like, oh, who in the world's going to watch Clemson, Georgia Tech? Well, it was on Monday night by itself on Labor Day night. So I'm watching Clemson, Georgia Tech on that Monday night, which if it was played as it typically would at noon on Saturday, I'm not watching that game because there's better games to be watched. I think where it shows up, where the Big Ten shows up here, is look at Michigan, Colorado State.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in the world plays those kind of games and gets almost 4 million views on a game playing
True.
Colorado State.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Right. Absolutely.
The Big 12 shows up here with West Virginia against Pitt. That was up straight up against Penn State and Purdue, and they did fairly even numbers, fairly.
Correct.
Who else do we have here from the Big 12 showing up?
TCU.
Yeah, so TCU, Colorado,
NC,
that's
OU.
minus Deion Sanders. Nobody's watching Colorado. They're awful. So yeah, Oklahoma, UTEP. Okay, so not anything of great shakes there down the line. So we'll get into it a little bit here with week 2. So Bama, Texas, my goodness, you put those two together and
right.
You can kind of split the credit there in terms of who brought
Well,
the
that's what I'm saying.
eyeballs
Your
to both
blue
teams.
blood games are going to be what they are. But the games where you're having conversations about, Wisconsin and Northwestern and things of that nature, I think that people pretend that the Big 12 is like way behind the Big 10. I think financially, obviously, yes. But the aesthetics of it, we're not as far behind the Big 10 as people think.
Well, again, Cody, I don't know what your definition is there. To me, there's a pretty large gap in TV viewership.
Okay, I would say that's possibly fair. But if you take out Ohio State and Michigan, different conversation. If you take out OU and Texas,
you're taking the two best. Well, you can't do that.
Why? Well, hold on. That's it. No, I can, because that's what my prerequisite was coming into this originally was if you take out the top heavy teams, the bottom half of all of these other conferences don't compare to the Big 12. So that is very relevant.
Well, I think they do compare. But if we're not talking about who's better on the field. We're talking about TV right this second. And I just think that you're going to see, first of all, to take out Ohio State and Michigan, then you got to take out Oklahoma and Texas, and you got to take out Georgia and Alabama, and you got to be, you can't just take out the two biggest brands. And I understand your point that they rule the conference and they just overwhelm it from a popularity standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And
we'll never catch Ohio State and Michigan when it comes to popularity. I'm aware of that. And when I say we, I'm not just talking about Oklahoma State. I'm saying most of the Big 12 in general. Yeah.
So we're going to get into conference games starting about right here, I would think, with week 4. Ohio State and Wisconsin played, and that game was awful. Ohio State was up by 4 touchdowns before anybody blinked. And, it was the second highest rated game of the week. And Michigan, Maryland, Maryland's not bringing anything to the table for the most part. That's the Michigan crowd. And the highest Big 12 game that week was Oklahoma, Kansas State. Mm-hmm. And that was on Fox. So, big network. And that was a primetime game at 3.5 million. Texas Tech did fairly well on ESPN.
So I'm saying there's not a light years difference. I mean, we're not there yet. Yeah, we may never get there. But again, what I'm saying is the gap is the talent gap is smaller than people want to pretend, in my opinion.
Well, if it's 4.5 million views and 4.3 compared to 3.3 and 2.2, you're looking at like 1 million plus more views against one of them and almost doubling the other one. You are doubling the other one.
Correct. But you're talking about the conference that everybody said was dead 2 years ago. That's
I'm not here to pile on the Big 12 by any stretch. Not at all.
I'm saying if you hear national prognostications, nobody watches the Big 12. I'm
No,
just
no, no,
saying
no,
that's
no.
not true.
I'm not saying that. And if we would go to we don't have to go through every week unless you want to. If we went to the Texas TCU game, I think that was the highest viewed game of the year. And again, I just did a series on this, so I've got a lot of these
Gotcha.
numbers in my head. But I do believe I'm almost positive that was the highest rated game of the year in the Big 12 at a little over 5 million.
Well, no, I'm glad I said something. I like being educated, right? I like learning because the more you know, obviously knowledge is power. But yeah, again, I know that there's a big gap between the SEC and us. I know there's a big gap between the Big Ten and us. I just think it's a disillusionment to pretend that the gap is talent massive.
I got you. We don't have to go any further. And
And,
17,
guys,
17 million people watched Ohio State and Michigan, and I know you already know that.
if TCU and Michigan played 10 times last season, I would wager that TCU wins at least 6 of them.
So I would wager the other direction, and as you probably have caught, most people would. But you know what? You have more evidence on your side, so I respect your opinion because leading up to that game, I had this gut feeling that TCU was going to win the game, but I didn't pull the trigger, and I picked Michigan to win.
Really?
But I had that did not surprise me at all. Now, like I say, I still think Michigan's a better team, but they didn't prove it. So I've got nothing to stand on by making. Well, you can look at the rest of the season and kind of make something out of it if you want to go. But I don't think really Michigan, outside of beating Ohio State, really proved anything that substantial throughout the rest of it. Penn State's a pretty good team. And they took them to the woodshed. But the two teams lined up once, and TCU won the game. And even though it turned out to be a close game on the scoreboard, TCU had control of that game most of the way.
Yes, sir.
Like I had Michigan fans on here the other day trying to compare playing TCU as close as they did to Ohio State playing Georgia as close as they did. And I was like, are you kidding me? Come on. Number one, TCU was up 21-3. They control most of the game. And some of their turnovers, Michigan fans want to excuse away their pick sixes, but TCU had a couple turnovers that were lucky, like deflected passes,
right?
That were dropped passes, deflected back, and a Michigan safety's just standing there waiting for it. So,
yeah, when people sometimes say they don't think that this was a good example, I think it's a perfect example of what I'm saying. The SEC is really far out there, right? We're all trying to reel them in to some degree.
Yep.
But again, I don't buy all the Big Ten hype. Their marketing is traditionally way better than ours is, but we have Brett Yormark now, so that's getting resolved. I think the perception shows itself more than legitimacy. I'm sorry. I don't. There's no way Northwestern beats Kansas if they play 10 times. I don't see it happening.
So the Northwestern that we've seen most of the last 2 years, they've just been they've been an FCS team basically the last 2 years. They've been so bad. I'll take the Northwestern.
Okay, well, we can say Minnesota too. KU would beat Minnesota with their own running back.
Yeah, see that then we could argue that all afternoon, and we're never going to convince the other person. I think Minnesota is a better football team than Kansas. Minnesota beat West Virginia in a bowl game 2 years ago. I'll check one off for you before you get to it. Iowa State was technically the worst team in the Big 12. They beat Iowa, who was a mid-tier team in the Big 10. But who else played last season? Did anybody else in the Big 10? So we had 2 wins there for the Big 12. I think that's it. I am almost positive that's it.
You're probably right.
You're probably right again. I can't think of anybody else. Oh, Wisconsin beat Oklahoma State. How are you forgetting that one? Okay,
Wisconsin because I blocked that out of my memory, boss.
Okay, so 2-1 Big 12. So it's not enough of a sample size, but it was 2-1 Big 12. Unless I'm missing somebody, I don't think I am. Yeah, there you go. So interesting. Yeah, again, I tried to be clear that there's a difference between, I think, at least for me, there's a difference between saying, okay, this is what I think
Roger.
versus this is what everything's telling me. And last season, what everything told me is that the Big 10 was kind of right there with the Big 12 and maybe even the Pac 12. Just like it was difficult to take the results and gain anything from them to say,
I could see that.
this one's way ahead of the other ones. But in terms
Roger.
of what I think, when I put it all together, I think that the Big Ten's the second best conference.
Yeah, no, I agree. I completely agree. I'm just saying I don't think the gap between us and the Big Ten talent-wise is as big as people want.
Oh, I agree. I
Make it out
agree.
to be.
Absolutely. I agree.
And I think the gap between the Big 12 and the Pac 12 is considerably bigger than the gap between the Big 12 and the Big 10.
Well, that's an interesting one there because I've been pounding on the Pac 12 for 5 or 6 years, and rightfully so. Everybody else should be too, because they've been awful. And I have a lot of Pac 12 fans that think I'm too brutal on the Pac 12. Well, the Pac 12, I go to these numbers because these are the kind of videos I produce. Is I analyze the conferences during the off season. How well did they play against each other? In 2021, the Pac-12 went 2-16 against the other 4 conferences. They went 500 against the Mountain West. Like they couldn't beat anybody. Awful. Now, if that happened one season to a conference, I'd say, and again, you got to look at who's playing whom.
Right.
If your
And what
conference is
time?
if your conference is 2-0 against another conference, but your 2 best teams play their 2 worst teams, well, you got to take everything into context. So I even build out a system that takes the seedings and readjusts everything.
Right.
And the Pac-12 was just that bad. So it couldn't be measured in any way. I do think that the conference had a resurgence this past year. I think that their top 5 teams were pretty darn good.
I think you're being very generous, but I'll go with it.
So where do you think that separation is between the Big 12 and the Pac-12?
So it's same kind of conversation, right? I know you don't like taking out people, but when you take out OU and Texas because they're gone, when you take out USC and UCLA because they're gone,
yeah,
then you have
okay, we're going forward. Okay, that's fine.
And then you have okay, we can stick with right now. We can say I'm fine with that. So you have USC, you have UCLA, you have Utah, you have Oregon. Who else?
Washington.
Okay.
They're pretty deep up top. At least if these now, I don't know that these are built on good foundations. I think this is a lot quarterback driven. Like Washington got Michael Penix. Oregon got Bo Nix. They had a really good quarterback year, and those guys are sticking around for this year. So I think they're going to be formidable again this year. And I am judging the Pac-12 against itself, so I'm giving them a lot of credit, but based on how awful they've been the last 5 years, just to say, hey, they've shown up a little bit here this past season. So I'm not saying that there's some juggernaut by any stretch.
I think after USC and Utah and maybe in Oregon, I think after those 3, it gets a little dicey. I know Chip Kelly seems to be turning it around in UCLA. UCLA's got some stuff going for him. I get all that. I know that Oregon State is better right now than they've been in maybe 2 decades. I understand all that. But I still think it's a marketing semantic to prop up, let's say, Washington. Washington's a good example. So you believe that Washington is better than, say, a TCU? Or Baylor?
In the same,
or North State?
Well, are we talking about last year or kind of transitioning into this year?
You go with last year. I mean, obviously, it's more relevant to transition this year, but I'm just saying for
I think TCU captured lightning in a bottle. I do not think that they were the second or third best team in the country. I'm not going to just pile on them for all these miracle wins that they had and say that they weren't any good, because they were good. I think that they were one of the 7 or 8 best teams in the country. And I would say that there was probably no Pac-12 team better than them, but then there was a line of teams that were like almost as good as them.
This is the beauty of being a Big 12, brother. It really is, because honestly, the perception of the Big 12 is comparable to the perception of Oklahoma State, right? Good conference, but will never be great. And in Big 12 country, we eat it up, right? This is now a conference, and it is so funny to see how things shift, right? A long time ago, what did all the SEC people say? Oh, Big 12, all they have is offense. They couldn't stop a nosebleed. Well, now we've turned into a defensive-oriented conference while they're over there lighting it up for 58, 61 points.
Yeah.
It is honestly crazy. The Big 12 has been ahead of innovation before its time. What problem is, we had Bob Bowlesby, and he didn't know how to market himself out of a love seat, let alone a conference. So the perception of the Big 12 has always been OU and Texas. And what has OU done every time they get in the Final Four? Kapow! So that is the perception of the Big 12. And I understand it. I embrace it. I'm here for it, because it's not going to matter until you start knocking down that tree. We got to win more games. Beating Michigan in the Final Four for TCU, yes, that was a good look for the Big 12. I liked it. Getting drugged through the mud 17 ways from Sunday in the national title game, yeah, not a good look for the Big 12. But it does add more I guess, fodder for the cannon. And it allows the conversation of, because I think it is slightly preposterous that Washington could be viewed as good as TCU or Kansas State. But it is what there is a perception.
You think it's
out there,
preposterous?
And I get it. Yes.
Cody, if you flipped the argument, so I've got no dog in this fight. I'm just neutral guy, Pac-12, Big 12, whatever. I'm just calling it as I see it. You obviously have a dog in the fight. If you flipped those seasons, so you can't look at TCU's season and say, that's amazing, good for them, great story, whatever. But look how they beat Texas Tech. Look how they, we can go through the list. Look how they beat your team.
Yeah.
Kansas State, you had 2 quarterbacks get hurt in that game. They did ride the wire the whole way. And you're going to put Kansas State right there with them. And I've got no issue with that. They obviously beat them in the Big 12 championship game. So you could say those teams are about even. And now we're comparing Washington. Well, again, unfortunately, we don't have many out of conference games to truly compare these teams, but Washington went 11-2. They lost to UCLA. They lost to Arizona State. Anyway, they beat Texas in the bowl game. They beat Michigan State. That was their big non-conference game. But of course, Michigan
we
State
all
was
beat
no
Texas
good.
except for OU.
Yeah, but Texas was good enough to play down to the wire. Should have beat Alabama, actually.
Absolutely should have.
I think the TCU claim would look better if Georgia would have crushed Ohio State. Like if Georgia would have just annihilated everybody in their path. But man,
see, my thing is with Washington or any team in the Big 12 or the Pac-12, how many guaranteed wins do you have in the Big 12? 1, 2, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
How many guaranteed wins do you have in the Pac-12? 5, 6 yearly?
Oh,
come on, man.
Again, if we're going back before last year, I tend to agree with you more. But last year, this is a pretty strong, deep layer to get through. USC, Utah, Oregon State, Washington, UCLA. All those teams were good teams last year. And when I say good, I mean they were top 15 to 25 good.
Oregon State? Okay. I'm just saying, man, half of that conference is a massive pillow fight. So I don't understand how you can how anybody can look at a record and find it justifiable to say that they would be better than a team in the Big 12 when the Big 12 you got to show up with your lunch pail ready to go to war every Saturday. You don't
So,
get the luxury of taking it easy.
but if I was going to use the same terms against the Big 12 that you're using against the Pac 12, like, I don't know where you're going to where are you going to back up uh, Kansas State's season?
What
They
do you mean
lost
we're
to
going
Tulane. When they went out of conference, they lost to Tulane and they
to?
got smoked by Bama. Like, and so if I was going to take your stance, I would say Kansas State, well, they just beat a bunch of teams in the Big 12.
Yeah. And the Big
So
12 is obviously considerably different than the Pac 12. That's what I'm saying. There's not a guaranteed win in the Big 12. And you know
I
that.
I agree that the conference is deeper, but I don't know that the Big 12 last year, I know that they didn't go 5 or 6 deep like the Pac 12 did at the top.
And how do you have that perception?
I have that perception from Oregon going 10-3, beating a North Carolina team in a bowl game. I've got that from Oregon State beating Florida in a bowl game, going 10-3, and beating a good Fresno State team that was like 11 or 12 win team. I got that from Washington. What I just said about Washington, USC, UCLA, USC beat Notre Dame. Good team, top 20 team. Utah won the conference. Okay, where are you taking your argument on the Big 12? What's of substance there?
Well, I think the parity speaks to itself. At one point in time last season, right? How many teams were ranked in the top 25 of the Big 12? And then even from a statistical perspective, there wasn't a team in the Big 12 that ran away from everybody. So if you look at every single game, right, whatever metric you're trying to go by, all of the games were pretty competitive. So yeah, just up and down, top bottom of the league. There's not a game that you can, take it easy. I don't want to say like take it easy, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, the worst teams in the Big 12, Iowa State, West Virginia, Kansas.
Last
Yes,
year,
absolutely. Absolutely. Far better than the Pac 12, better than Arizona State, Colorado, Stanford, Cal. These teams are
Rogers,
awful. Awful.
right?
I'm right there with you. Top to bottom, we're right there with you.
But
And
but
obviously, you're comparing 10 teams versus 12. So
tracking.
this hurts your argument many times. I'm guessing you've had these fights before and you've had to correct people because you're comparing a 10-team conference versus many times a 14-team conference. So it's obviously easier to most people argue the top.
Hey, we
So
have 14 teams this year.
well, yeah, exactly. You do now. So there you go. I just think it's a tough call between the Big 12 and the Pac 12 top to bottom.
I got you. Okay.
But
Well,
I
this
definitely
season will
think that
be
the Big 12 is
interesting.
a better conference at the bottom.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. And maybe I'm underappreciating Washington and Oregon State. Maybe it's very possible. I
May-
will do more research on both of those.
Maybe
Because
you could get on board with this, Cody, that I would love the scheduling to be taken out of the hands of the schools, handed to a committee, and not like the college football playoff selection committee that would do whatever they wanted. No, there would be like a system we would put in place where everybody would be given an equitable non-conference schedule. And then the committee would only bring a little nuance to it, meaning, okay, I want everyone to play a 500 non-conference schedule. Like, I don't think that USC should be playing Alabama and Notre Dame, and then somebody else should be playing no one. Like Minnesota played
yeah,
nobody for like 5 years out of conference. I want equitable non-conference schedules so we can better evaluate these teams, number one. And then number two, the only reason I'd have a committee is the committee would say, the computer might say North Carolina State plays Oregon State, and the committee would be able to say, you know what, North Carolina State and Tennessee would be like a better regional draw. So let's switch that, but it would be instead of these teams, like I'll throw one of your Big 12 brethren under the bus. Baylor is not. So I'm going to credit Baylor. They got Utah this year. they're finally scheduling some teams. And I think they Ole Miss recently, BYU home and home the last couple of years, but before that, Baylor. I looked through this, not played a ranked team since 1997.
No, you're right. It's a lot of your Stephen F. Austin.
Oh yeah, Lamar, Sam Houston State. It's like, oh, come on. So I would want this scheduling nightmare to be taken out of people. Michigan didn't play anybody. They're not playing anybody this year.
Well, and the SEC, and I'm not trying to downplay the SEC, but they always end up in like week 10 playing the Citadel.
Sure.
Right, which I find kind of odd. No, I completely agree. And you know what? I don't think it's a crazy conversation because Greg Sankey's already kind of put a little life raft out there in discussions about how if the SEC were to branch off, they could have their own governing body. They don't have to go through the NCAA. And this is my question to you, actually. Do you think the NCAA will become irrelevant in a governing body eventually? Or because they stayed away from this NIL thing.
Yes.
And to me, that killed them.
You just hit on the key point right there. Because for those 13 people in America that love the NCAA, but the rest of us that hated the NCAA, the one thing we couldn't deny is that they had power. Yeah. They would investigate or somebody would tell on someone they'd investigate. And if they laid down the law, everybody would abide by their ruling. So they had power. Now NIL's involved in recruiting, and that was all the NCAA did was
keep it all legit,
govern recruiting violations. Yep. So they're rendered useless at this point.
100%. And there's clearly a bias, right? Just from an Oklahoma State perspective. Yeah. In the last 3 years, you've had teams like Memphis, right? They got caught destroying email servers, but they have evidence of text messages going back and forth to players about pay. You had Louisville get in trouble. You had a couple other teams in the East Coast get in trouble. Alabama got in trouble. Kansas got in trouble. But did any of those teams get any type of bans? No. Who did? Oklahoma State, over a $300 receipt. And it's just like, you have clear evidence of teams destroying emails, destroying phones, destroying service. You have players coming out admitting they got money, they got offered money, and those schools get like a 3-game suspension, and we get a whole year ban. So clearly the NCAA is not about fairness. They're not about equality. They didn't kick us out of the tournament when we had Cade Cunningham because they knew that made them more money. The NCAA is it's a laughingstock of an organization, in my opinion, nowadays. And I was just curious, do you think they have future viability, or do you think they're on borrowed time?
Not the way things are going, because, again, NIL is driving so much with recruiting, and that's going to be at the core of recruiting violations going forward. And if they've chosen, and they have, that they don't want to get sued, they don't want to get involved, well, they've rendered themselves useless. And it's an interesting point that you bring up about that particular case, because, as you well know, the NCAA benefits financially from the men's and the women's basketball tournaments. So they tend to not suspend those players as opposed to football players.
Yeah. It's odd. If they were fair and balanced,
yeah,
awesome. But it's like publicly visible that they're not fair and balanced whatsoever.
I'm going to get to this question on the screen, or this comment, because boy, they're coming after your guy here. We'll get to this one first, because then I got a question about scheduling, or a comment that I want you to respond to. So we've got our guy, Journeyman, who says, I'm sorry, I've been an Oklahoma State fan all my life, and I think Gundy needs to be fired. I don't care how good Gundy is as a coach. I want something new.
Oh, this is going to get juicy. So I don't know how many people you got watching, but this one's going to get good.
Well, hopefully it keeps going up.
I think that Gundy is coaching for his job in 2023 because just like we talked about in the very beginning of the show, he gets his hands on top of the mountaintop, but he never peeks back over. And you can go back historically, and it's always been primarily due to his conservative nature in big games. He does get ultra conservative in big games. He does have a little bit of a disassociation sometimes with his student athletes. He's always had a little bit of a disassociation when it comes to some of the recruiting side of things. But a lot of things came out this offseason, right? Some of the issues with the wide receiver room and some of the issues with Casey Dunn as offensive coordinator, and some of the issues we had with recruits not getting treated right all the time, so on and so forth. You just heard some of this little stuff, right? And since it's come out, you're seeing a completely new side of Gundy. This year is a different Gundy. No, not just because he cut the mullet and grew out a somewhat majestic beard. He's got a ways to go, but he's working on it. He is more personable with players. He's more involved with recruiting. He's has an open door policy now. He allows the players to come in and talk at a regular basis. He's more involved with the defensive side of the ball. He admitted for 16 years of coaching, he didn't pay attention whatsoever to the defense. He hired defensive guys to do the defensive stuff. But he said the last 2 seasons, he wanted to see what Jim Knowles was doing. He wanted to see what Jim Knowles did after he left and how it all kind of made sense. And you're seeing that right now on the field. The players are admitting that this is a completely different Gundy. It seems to be a different Gundy out on the recruiting trail. So hopefully this is a revitalized Gundy. This is the Gundy that found his fire again. The I'm a man, I'm 40 Gundy. Okay, yeah, maybe people want to throw shade because of that video, but and I had the fortunate ability to have Bobby Reed on my show. He was a fiery guy that stood up for his players 24/7. And then over time, it's kind of reversed, right? He doesn't mind throwing players under the bus occasionally. And that's not a good look unless it's honesty. And right now, you're hearing from inside the program that everything is light years different than the last 2 springs, not only from a talent and depth perspective, but just the staff. And what people don't take into consideration always is Coach Hammersmith's been there forever. Coach Duffy's been there forever. Coach Greg Richmond's been there for quite some time. Coach Dickey's been there for quite some time. Most of our coaches have been there anywhere from 8 to 14 years. The continuity on the staff alone is going to keep us competitive. The continuity on the staff alone should win us 7 games. Now it's down to, will the simplicity and talent take over to get us back to that 10, 11, 12 win scenarios?
Cody, I don't know why this did not dawn on me until just a second ago when you mentioned the name Jim Knowles, but you are a great resource to go to right here. We've got an Ohio State channel. We've got a lot of Ohio State fans. All right.
Nice.
I believe it was posted by On3 this week, listing Jim Knowles as the 3rd best defensive coordinator in the country. What we saw at Ohio State this year was them improve. Even he made the comment, or he was probably asked the question, knowing Ohio State media, you had 3 stars at Oklahoma State. Now you're going to be dealing with 4 and 5 stars. You should be able to do something with this defense. And he agreed. What else is he going to say?
Yeah.
Regardless, they were markedly better against marginal and bad Big Ten offenses. They let down against Penn State and Michigan and Georgia. So when they faced the elite, it was the same old thing. Okay, when I saw Jim Knowles' record at Oklahoma State and tried to think, okay, this is what he did at OK State versus let's see what he does at Ohio State, I saw him take over, I don't remember the rankings exactly, but a decent defense, an okay defense, and they actually got worse before they got better. And then when they got better and better and better, and then he had that great 2021 defense that was a top 5 defense in the country. So what's your evaluation of Jim Knowles?
He's amazing. He's an odd, quirky guy, right? He's not your traditional run-of-the-mill type of coordinator. So his mannerisms and everything take a while to get used to. The way that he's able to correlate the film onto the field for the players, it's unique. I'll definitely say that. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I do know that Ohio State brought him there to win in the playoffs. Like, that is 100%. They didn't bring him there to win 12 games. They expected to win 10, 12 games without him. They brought him there to win the big one. So time will tell. But again, this is another year into the system. They have quite a few returning players on defense, if I recall correctly. And just like you just mentioned with Oklahoma State, it was an ascension, right? It was, okay, we're trying to figure it out. What he brought from Duke, cerebral wise, maybe didn't work, right? It wasn't as applicable as he thought. So he had to work some things for a couple of years to get it where he wanted to. Then it got pretty good. And then when everybody figured it out, we were legitimately number one defense in America in a lot of categories. I think you'll see the same thing at Ohio State, except for it'll be graded on a bell curve. I don't think it'll take him 4 years. I think this coming year you will see a massive difference because, again, he's got some weird ways that he approaches things. He's the guy that locks himself in his office and sleeps there. And you don't know as a player, you have no clue what the game plan is. None until he comes out of that office. And it could be on a random Wednesday. But once he gets it down, he'll be able to explain to you not only schematically, but physiologically why it's going to be better.
And as you well know, because of Tanner McAllister transferring as well, Ohio State fans were expecting, okay, we know that there's a learning curve, but you got a guy that's played 40 games at safety that's a cerebral player. He's going to be able to help teach this. That's going to help tremendously. And again, they were much better. The Michigan game. What's that?
Until they weren't.
Yeah. And I'm guessing because of the Jim Knowles connection that you probably had a little bit more interest in Ohio State football this past season. Yes. We're kind of looking out the corner of your eye just to see this will be interesting. What's he going to do with these guys? And like the Michigan game was a perfect example. They went to halftime with a 3-point lead, 20-17, and they shut down Michigan every play of the half, except for 2 plays. They got burned on 2 plays, but every other play, 0. Like nothing. Second half was a little bit more leakage, but still would have won the game, but just huge, massive plays against them.
Now, the only thing that I think would be viable for me to question at Ohio State, and I'm not trying to take a jab, it'll be perceived that way, but you're dealing with a different animal. Just like Jim Knowles alluded to, you're dealing with 4 or 5-star guys that have always been the guy. Right? Their whole high school, junior high career, they were that dude. And they get to Ohio State, and now you're asking somebody to dig deeper than they've ever dug before to accomplish more than they've ever dug before. Guys that come to Oklahoma State, they're built for that. They're 2-star guys that nobody wanted, right? So if you tell them, you're going to have to work harder than everybody else, you're going to have to lift more than everybody else, you're going to have to do film more than everybody else, that's typically the type of guy we get, which allows Jim Knowles to look more like a savant at times, in my opinion. I do not know that the physical buy-in at Ohio State will be the same from his players that they were at Oklahoma State. That's the only thing that I think could potentially be up in the air is, are the players at Ohio State going to buy into his brand? Because his brand is maybe not suited for a bunch of 5-star guys. Time will tell, but his system is phenomenal. And you know what? Selfishly, if it doesn't work out, okay, cool. Come back to O State, buddy. Although I will admit, I'm a very big fan of our new defense coordinator. I hate that Gundy goes to the back page of Auto Trader News to find his coordinators. I don't like it. But sometimes he uncovers gems. Mike Yursich was kind of a gem. I do think that this is another one of those scenarios. I think that Brian Nardo is very, very, very good.
I came across some other statistics this week that I found interesting and wanted to throw those by you concerning recruiting spending. Did you see any of this?
I did. Yes.
We'll pop this up on the screen. And so I'll give you my quick take, and then you're obviously going to be able to shed light on this from the standpoint of what we're looking at here. So this is courtesy CBS Sports. So Oklahoma and Texas spent the most. And again, if you can't see the columns there watching out there, the left column is how much was spent in 2022 fiscal year, and then the previous 5 years on the right. So Oklahoma and Texas out in front of everyone. Then you see a drop below $1 million, and you see pretty much everybody's in the same range. Then down here at the bottom, we see Oklahoma State. Now, before I cut you loose on this, Cody, my thought is, first of all, they're numbers, so they can be manipulated in all sorts of different ways, and they don't mean everything. But most fan bases are going to look at this and be like, well, the schools that spend a lot of money, they care. They want to win. They're trying. The ones that don't, they don't care. And or the other response is, wow, look at who's not spending much money and they're getting a lot of bang for their buck. And then look who Rutgers showed up second in the Big Ten. What in the world's going on there? They suck, you know. But again, it's their financial figures. So in having a couple conversations with other media people covering other teams, they've brought to light, we have a deal here, we've got a deal there. There are certain things going on that will actually cut some cost. So it brings more light to it. So we see Oklahoma State way behind in how much money they're spending. And again, because it's a 5-year number on the right, I think it gives it a little bit more validity that this seems to be what's going on every year.
Well, in the famous words of the Donald J. Trump, it's fake news. Okay, fake news.
All right.
Legitimately speaking, I know we're right around 700, 750 right now, but we do have a lot of things that help us. Like for instance, we don't pay for hotels when recruits come. We put them up in the team hotel, because we're not there to sales pitch them on, something fancy and pretty and bright. We're there to sales pitch them on, this is what you're going to do on a day-to-day basis. We do have some private contractors out with air flight type of stuff that we don't always calculate into the budget as well. So that number is extremely misleading. But if you still go to the 750,000 that I heard we had spent last season, it still does put us at the very bottom half of the Big 12. So is the 400 range a little misleading? Absolutely. But even if you go to 700, which I know is a little bit more accurate, it still puts us there towards the bottom of spending in the Big 12. See, I also know last year Kansas spent $1.1 million, but they're only showing around 900,000. Again, there's some minute details that you can write off essentially and not have it charged against your budget that Oklahoma State uses. Somebody like a Texas, they're flying people in from all over the country, right? And they're putting them up in nice hotels, and they get private, not a private driver, but they get individual drivers from the airport to the hotels and to the facilities. We don't do all that. We keep it simple. We bring them to campus, and we do everything on campus, and we don't really deviate from that much. And Gundy is a creature of habit. No matter how much money we spend, we're not going to go ahead and start spending extra on flights and hotels because we don't need to. But it's still not enough, if that answers the question.
And to extend on that point, how have you been on Gundy and his staff's recruiting? Because, again, for a program that's churning out, excuse me, some of you on the chat, 8 and 4 seasons, if you take them all into account, average, but has been a top 25 type program. The recruiting classes are, correct me if I'm wrong here because I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm usually seeing 40 to 50 in the country, 35 to 50 in the country, correct?
Yeah, our net, according to 247 over the last 15 years, is like 34, 35.
Okay.
But that's our best ever was like number 26, and currently we're at number 27. So recruiting has been not good. I'll just put it there. I mean, we recruit the guys that we need at the, that we filled voids, and our strength coach is the only strength coach in America making over $1 million for a reason, right? He takes 2-star guys and puts them in the NFL. I know Gundy gets a lot of credit for that, and he should, but even more credit needs to go to Rob Glass, our strength and conditioning coach that we've had for 20 some odd years. Because without him, I don't know how many guys we do actually have in the NFL. But we haven't capitalized, right? Again, we get our fingers to the top of the mountaintops, but we never get over it. That's the frustration as an Oklahoma State fan, is we always fail to capitalize. 2011 didn't capitalize, right? We should have, we could have, but we didn't. 2 years ago, losing the Big 12 title game, literally 4 inches away from the pylon. Okay, you played for a Big 12 title. You beat Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl in a very big way. We should capitalize, but we didn't. I do not understand our limitations as far as inside the recruiting staff. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I do feel like sometimes we push ourselves in this box. So instead of, going after a guy aggressively, sometimes we'll just be like, nope, he's a 5-star. We're not even going to mess with it. I don't know why we take that approach. I really don't. But again, W's matter. And I will say this. I do think that this year Gundy realizes recruiting's a little bit more important than previously, because with the NIL and the transfer market, the way it is nowadays, your high school recruiting has to be more on point than ever before, right? You don't have the luxury of maybe 10 guys not quite working out anymore, because you're only going to give 15 scholarships to high school kids and 10, 15 scholarships available for transfers. So what you're seeing is a more concerted effort to go after big guys. And we did. We went after Gatlin Blair, and we just found out recently that our NIL collective is pretty good, but it's not A&M good. It's not Alabama good. So that's some of the difficulty is we write some players off because we think they're going to say no. And then just redeveloping some of the relationships, right? We explored and exploited recruiting the state of Texas for so long. We don't have to just recruit Texas as much anymore, but that could be a perceptional issue as well. Gatlin Blair might go to Michigan. Hey, maybe we don't have Michigan money.
Good stuff here with Cody. You can catch Cody on Lockdown Oklahoma State. I haven't really looked into anything with realignment, any other rhetoric out there since we had our conversation last week. Is there anything that's hot off the presses in regards to what's being talked about out there?
No, it's still same old, man. I will say a large portion of the Big 12 contingency is just waiting on the domino to drop.
Yep.
A lot of us feel, I'll speak for me. I feel like it's inevitable. It's a foregone conclusion that the Pac-12 at some point in time will not be the same without UCLA and USC. I don't know how, if you're a president or an AD or a chancellor from in Arizona, okay, I don't see how you can financially justify staying in the conference unless they're able to throw a Hail Mary real quick and get financially close. Because if there's more than a $10 million difference per school, I just don't see how you justify staying in the Pac-12, even if it's temporary.
I hear you. I hear both sides, and I certainly have weighed in on both sides of that. One last thing on the scheduling, and I should have mentioned this before because we're talking about the Big 10 versus the Big 12, and we're talking about schedules and what could be fixed. I'm racking my brain, and of course, you got recollection of every Oklahoma State game, but I got a pretty good recollection of everybody's schedules. I can't think of when the last time Oklahoma State played a regular season game against the Big 10 team. Like that shouldn't we see Oklahoma State play Iowa? Shouldn't we see them play whoever, fill in the blank? Shouldn't we see these games? We should see these games. These schools tend to schedule, kind of go to the same pockets all the time for their games. We should see that. I'm going to date myself. The last time I think, and I'll check myself, last time I remember Oklahoma State playing a non-conference game against the Big 10 was they played Ohio State, and when Mike Gundy was the quarterback at Oklahoma State. That was like 1989.
Non-conference wise?
I am racking my brain. You played a home and home with Pitt a few years ago, the Boise State series, the Arizona State series.
We've got Oregon and Michigan home and away coming up.
Okay, Michigan's coming up. Okay.
Not Alabama. We've Alabama and Oregon.
Oh, Bama, Oklahoma State, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Had some good non-conference games with Florida State here in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, you're right. I can't recall a Big Ten. We've played Purdue in bowl games a couple times.
Yeah, you whipped them in a bowl game. And
they also
Wisconsin last year. And
they also Drew Brees the hell out of us too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was in the Alamo Bowl.
Yes, 1997.
Actually, you wanna an interesting thing that, sometimes things get, remembered incorrectly, like, people think Tebow won 2 national championships when he was not the quarterback for the first team. That was Chris Leak, of course. That was Billy Dickens was the quarterback for Purdue in that game against, Oklahoma State.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Freeze was in
Okay.
98, 99, 2000. That was the 97, Alamo Bowl.
That's
Yes.
awesome.
But,
I did not know that.
then you guys, blasted them about 10 years ago in, like, the Heart of
Yeah, the
Dallas
Heart of
Bowl.
Dallas Bowl.
Like, oh, that
I remember some of it. I actually got married there and roofied on the same night. Yeah. Oh yeah, I woke up in jail. It was awesome. And then I was like, we got to get to the bowl game, but we had to get married first. It's a whole ordeal.
Whoa.
It's a whole ordeal. Yeah, we were there to get married. And then we went to this bar across the street, and this young couple was being really nice and wanting to buy our drinks and everything. And then I went out, got the rental car, and I remember being in a Walmart parking lot, and then I remember being in jail, and then, and then I remember getting married and walking to the Oklahoma State game, and my wife was not happy. She didn't want to be there. She didn't feel good. It was cold. There was a massive pillar right in front of us, so we couldn't see half the game anyways. Yeah. Yeah, I was there.
That is tremendous.
You remember more of it than I do for sure, but I was there.
Got married and thrown in jail all within 24 hours. That is phenomenal.
Right.
Not a whole
That's
lot of people
right.
can say that. But man, I'm going to go searching for the last time Oklahoma State played a Big Ten team in the regular season because again,
That's a good call.
See, these things should happen.
I should know this. I feel
I'm
like I
going to
failed
tell you,
you
don't be
today, Mark.
surprised. Don't be surprised if it's 1989 in Columbus against Ohio State. It's been forever. All right, good stuff.
Yeah, no, recruiting hasn't been great, but right now it's really good. And we've got a few legitimate targets out there that I think, matter of fact, I expect 2 commitments in the next week. And one of them is somebody who's got Nebraska. Who is the other one? There's Nebraska, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State. So we'll see. But yeah, man, recruiting looks better now than it has been. I do think, again, this last season was an eye-opener for Mike Gundy because he's never been a fan of the transfer portal, right? He's never been a fan of dipping in or pulling out. So and On3 Sports, all the way until signing day, had Oklahoma State rated as the #1 transfer class in the country. That's because of the assistants. Like, admittedly, Gundy, I don't know why he says certain things, but he recently said, I don't even know who's visiting until the coaches knock on my door and say, hey, we got a guy here. I'm like, dude, don't say that out loud. What are you doing?
No.
But hats off to the staff. Again, this is the staff that has been there for 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, 16 years, that type thing. Luckily, they have been out on the recruiting trail and the marketing, and it worked out well. But again, I think this last year was an eye-opener for Gundy. There has been times, albeit maybe forced, that Gundy has evolved, right? 2011, he didn't want Daniel Holgorsen, but he knew it was a good fit. The following year, he relinquished most every responsibility to Todd Monken, and Todd Monken got to learn the offense from Brandon Whedon because, again, he got forced into the Dana Holgorsen stuff. But just like Dana Holgorsen said, you don't have an offensive line to run what you want to run. You got to find a way to score. I can do that. It worked. And then 2020, right, the OAN t-shirt thing, Chuba Hubbard coming out and saying he wasn't going to play unless Gundy apologized. Well, not only did Gundy learn management of players a little bit better there, but he admittedly also learned a lot from COVID in and of itself, because prior to COVID, Gundy had never let the 3s rotate with the 1s ever. Well, COVID, because of bodies, right, and you never knew when somebody was going to be sick, you had to rotate the 2s and the 3s in with the 1s on a consistent basis, and it taught him so much that we're doing that on a regular basis now. And then you saw what happened in 2021. So there's been a few times that Gundy's been pushed, and he responded. And then we get the greatest schedule in the history of mankind. Bet the over, ladies and gentlemen. Even if you hate the Big 12, even if you hate O State, bet the over. You'll thank your pocketbooks. You can direct message me in happiness.
We were talking over unders the other night and going through them, and I was never a big win total guy. I didn't get into that, but I'm on a certain Michigan podcast every week, and our guy Steve Dace used to push me kind of into that. Did I mention this the other night? You can tell me to shut up if I did. But we were going through win totals.
Shut up. I'm just kidding.
We were going through win totals. Too late. I'm already far into it now. We were going through win totals, and so I was just curious what my video looked like and how I did, because I didn't even know how I did the year before. So I'm kind of like, while we're taking calls and so forth, I'm kind of scrolling through my video from last year, and so I was 3-2 on my over under calls until I delivered a 3-pack at the end of the video, and I said, "Here's the deal: Georgia, Ohio State, and Michigan are at 10.5 over on all 3 of them, because I can't imagine that 2 of them won't come through, and you'll win money if you get 2 out of 3. And then, of course, they all 3 went over 10.5. And so 6-2 for me on the over unders last year. So now we've got from Cody, take that OK State plus 6.5. Take the over.
Absolutely.
Take it.
Absolutely. And I think OU is going to be better, but them being at 9.5, to me, that seems a little scary. I wouldn't touch it. I mean, if I did touch it, I'd bet the under.
Yeah.
But I can't talk crap. They beat us almost every year, so it is what it is.
All right. Good stuff with Cody. Cody, we appreciate you being here. It was a great discussion. And for everybody that's jumping online with us late in the conversation, all you have to do is go back and watch what you missed. And I definitely recommend that. We had a nice, we mixed up the Big 10 and the Big 12. Then we went at the Pac-12 and the Big 12 and the rundown on OK State and what they've got coming up here this fall. It's all great stuff, Cody.
Well, yeah. And guys, Mark put me in check on some of the TV stuff, so I appreciate that as well.
Good stuff. So lock in on what Cody's got going on there on Locked On Oklahoma State. You see his Twitter handle right there, all day O State. Just go there and you can find everything from there. But I seriously recommend that you follow Cody on Twitter and everything that he's got going on. Cody, appreciate you stopping by, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you very, very much. It's an absolute honor. I appreciate the time. I appreciate you giving me a little bit of a platform here to chop it up, because, again, Oklahoma State doesn't have the biggest media game, right, at all. So I'm trying to do my part. And although I don't want all the secrets to get out, because I don't want the spread to change, I want that over under to stay where it's at. I do want people to realize that we're in a better spot than we were last year by a long way. And so, yeah, hammer the over, guys. Hammer the over.
Well, Cody, for as much as I would like to tell you that being on this platform would affect the Vegas spread, I don't think we wield quite that much power.
No, everyone's downtrodden about Oklahoma State, and I secretly want it to stay that way.
Good stuff. We've got a Michigan show coming up here tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern time. We're going to take the deep dive on Michigan, 8 o'clock Eastern time, everyone. Cody, appreciate it, man. Come on back anytime.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. Yeah, follow me on Twitter. Check out the show. I just had Doug Gottlieb on the show yesterday, so feel free to check that out. And as always, I love all y'all. God bless. Go Pokes.